In an era where digital dominates, why do I still reach for my Nikon F3 for portraits in 2025? There's something about the way this camera feels in hand, the precision of its mechanics, and the way it renders light on film that keeps it relevant. Let's talk about the Nikon F3, its history, why I still use it, and a few of my favorite lenses that make it a portrait powerhouse. Released in 1980, the Nikon F3 was a groundbreaking camera. Nikon's first pro body with electric metering and a quartz time shutter. The Nikon F3 set the standard for other Nikon camera designs for decades. While the F3 was eventually succeeded by newer models such as the F4 and the F5, it remains one of the most reliable and beautifully crafted 35mm cameras ever made. Unlike its fully mechanical predecessor, the Nikon F2, the F3 relies on an electronic shutter, meaning it needs batteries to function properly. But that's a small trade-off for a camera that gives you precision metering, a bright interchangeable viewfinder, and compatibility with some of the best Nikon lenses ever made. If you've seen some of the other videos on the channel, you know I also shoot with a Nikon F5, and there are some key reasons why I picked that over the F3 in certain situations. For example, the F5 is an autofocus beast with advanced metering, faster operation, and full electronic control. If I'm shooting fast-paced portraits where I need to quickly lock onto a subject, I'm probably going to pick the F5. But in most of the cases where I do shoot portraits, I want that slower, more intentional process, something that's more connected to the craft of film photography, and the F3 is my go-to in that scenario. The F3, like most mechanical film cameras, forces me to slow down, to think about composition, lighting, and the expression in a way that autofocus cameras don't. It's a camera that rewards patience, and in portraiture, that's everything. Next, we're going to dive into some of my favorite lens choices for the Nikon F3 for my portrait work. I'm going to start with my favorite and then go down to, say, my least favorite, but they're all within my top three, so I rotate through these three lenses all the time when I'm shooting on my Nikon F3 for portraits. So let's start with the Nikon 105 f2.5 lens, the Portrait King. If I can only pick one portrait lens for the Nikon F3, it would be the 105 f2.5. This lens is legendary for a reason. It has beautiful rendering, a flattering compression, and that classic Nikon sharpness with smooth bokeh. It's the perfect lens for headshots and environmental portraits where you want that natural perspective with separation from the background. I have probably used this lens the most with my Nikon F3, and honestly, I am not disappointed. It is a beautiful option for portraits. Next, we have the Nikon 180mm f2.8 lens. If you want even more compression and subject isolation, the 180mm f2.8 lens is an absolute gem. This lens gives portraits a more dramatic look, making the background melt away while keeping the subject razor sharp. It's not always practical in tighter spaces. In fact, I only use this lens when I'm outside due to how tight it is, but if you do have room to shoot, it delivers some of the best looking portraits on film that I've ever taken. And lastly on our list, the Nikon 50mm f1.4 lens, the classic all-around option. If you've been around on the channel since I started shooting years ago, I was always an 85mm person, and I thought I was going to be as well when I switched over to film, but I literally fell in love with the 50mm focal length just because of its natural real-to-life look that it gives portraits. This 50mm f1.4 lens is compact, it's fast, and it's versatile. If I'm shooting in low light or want more of a natural field of view, this is my go-to. Wide open at f1.4, it has a dreamy, soft rendering that adds character to the portraits. And again, like I mentioned, y'all, character for me is one of the most important things when it comes to my portrait work. top down, it's sharp and super reliable. I've shot this lens a lot in low light. Some of my favorite photos I've ever taken, just not on film but in general, were taken with this lens in like a low light situation. And at f1.4, again, it's really freaking good. I was contemplating on getting the 50mm f1.2 lens just for that extra stop of light, but I'm fine with the f4. It works and I'm happy. I figured in this video I can share some tips for shooting portraits with the Nikon f3 if folks aren't accustomed to it, or if you're just looking for some extra things to add into your workflow as you go along taking more film photos in the future. Number one is use the manual focus to your advantage. Unlike modern cameras, the f3 forces you to slow down and manually focus. So take your time, use the split prism or micro prism focusing screen, and nail the focus on the eyes. Number two, metering. Trust the f3's center weighted meter. The f3's metering is center weighted, meaning it prioritizes the middle of the frame. When shooting portraits, meter for the skin tones, especially in tricky lighting situations to avoid under or overexposure. Number three, keep extra batteries handy. Now this doesn't just apply for film cameras, this applies for digital. All of our cameras take batteries, so make sure that you pack extra batteries. Since the f3 relies on electronic shutter, make sure you have spare LR44 batteries. This camera can technically still fire at 1/60th of a second without power, but you'll lose metering. And honestly, this camera's light meter is perfect, so make sure you have some extra batteries. Number four sounds kind of cliche, but it's embrace the film look. Pairing the f3 with great film stocks like Portra 400, 800, HP5, Tri-X 400, CineStill 800T, it gives portraits a unique aesthetic that digital just can't replicate. Film is imperfect in the slightest. When you're shooting film, you have to be okay with things not possibly turning out the way that you wanted it to be. But the more you plan, the more you learn how to use your camera, the more you learn about the film stock for each situation that you want to use it in, the better overall results that you're going to end up getting. And like I mentioned earlier, it's just a unique aesthetic about film that no matter how you try to replicate on digital and post, it just doesn't work. Fujifilm probably comes the closest in my opinion with the film simulations, but it's still just not film. The Nikon f3 is more than just a camera, it's an experience. It forces you to slow down, to think about every shot, and to embrace the beauty of imperfection. And 2025 is still one of my favorite cameras for portraits, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. But let me know in the comments what your favorite portrait camera is. Also, do you shoot with the f3? What lens do you love using the most? I'm very interested in hearing from you guys. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you click that like button, as well as subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and click that notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming content from the channel. Thanks again, keep shooting, and have a good day. Peace.